Stormfront Publishing presents Northern Light Frights, Issue 2. The Possession at Knik Glacier. Written by James Krieger. Performed by Thomas Richter. Chapter 1. Palmer, Alaska. Logan's lifted Ford Ranger rattled down the washboard stretch of Sullivan Road, pallets stacked high in the bed where Caleb and Drew were hanging on and probably regretting their decision to ride in back. The truck's long travel suspension did what it could, but there was no gentle way to hit washboards at any speed. "End of the road coming up," Kyle said from the passenger seat, snapping his Nokia shut after another failed attempt at finding a signal. He'd been Logan's best friend since 3rd grade, back when they used to waste hours playing Command and Conquer on the school computers. From the jump seats in the extended cab, Emily rolled her eyes. "You're not going to need that phone anyway." She caught Drew's eye in the rearview mirror and gave him a quick wink. Next to her, Kenny was already looking queasy from the constant rattling. The September afternoon sun hung low enough to flash through the trees, but they still had a few hours of daylight left. Logan downshifted as they approached the end of Sullivan, where the maintained road gave way to the unofficial trailhead that wound through the dunes toward Jim Creek and the distant face of the Knik Glacier. Nobody really knew who'd cut this trail. Some said it was hunters, looking for better access to the backcountry. Others claimed it was carved by natives generations ago. The resource extraction crowd had definitely been back here. The old drill sites and scatter of rusted equipment proved that. But there were other theories, too, whispered around campfires about who really used these trails after dark. Logan had dumped every spare dollar from his summer job at the catnip farm and mowing lawns into this truck. 35-inch mud terrains, custom railroad tie bumpers, a 4-inch lift kit, and enough LED lighting to turn night into day. His dad called it a waste of money. Looking at the rutted trail ahead, Logan called it essential. It was his black beauty. "How much further?" Kenny asked, his voice tight with barely contained nausea. "About 20 minutes, Logan replied, downshifting as they approached a particularly nasty section of washouts. "There's this perfect spot down by the shoreline. You can see the Knik Glacier from there, and not many people go that deep." Kyle shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "You sure about camping out here? My cousin says people have been finding weird stuff in these woods, like cultist stuff." "Those are just stories," Logan said, but his voice wasn't quite as confident as he'd hoped. Emily squeezed his shoulder from behind, and he relaxed a little. "Besides, we're sticking to the shoreline, not heading into the woods." The truck's suspension creaked as they navigated around a fallen spruce. Through the valley opening ahead, Logan could see the last rays of sunlight bleeding out of the sky, silhouetting the distant mountains and the massive face of the Knik Glacier against the darkening horizon. They needed to make camp soon. The valley got dark fast this time of year, and even with all his lights, setting up tents in pitch black was nobody's idea of fun. What Logan didn't mention were all the other rumors he'd heard about Jim Creek after dark. The ones about strange lights moving through the trees, about hunters finding bizarre symbols carved into the bark, about the eerie chanting that sometimes echoed across the valley on moonless nights. Kyle knew them too. They'd spent enough late nights trading stories about the weird stuff that went on out here, but neither of them wanted to spook Kenny and Emily. But those were just rumors, right? A hard bump sent a hollow boom echoing through the truck as the overstacked pallets shifted. Logan winced and tapped his brakes. "You guys alive back there?" he yelled out his window. Drew's response was lost in the rattle of the suspension, but the middle finger that appeared over the pile of pallets was answer enough. The trail wound deeper into the valley until it opened up into a wide clearing. Logan let out a low whistle. The recent rains had turned the depression ahead into a massive basin of standing water that stretched nearly the full width of the trail. That's pretty deep," Kenny said, leaning forward between the seats. "No way we're crossing that," Drew yelled through the rolled-down windows. "Hold on to something," Logan shouted back, already dropping into first gear. Kyle's eyes went wide. "Dude, punch it!" Logan's foot hit the floor. The Ranger's V6 roared as they charged toward the water. They hit the basin doing 30, sending a massive wave up over the hood that completely blinded them. The truck plunged nose first into the deeper water, then rocked back violently as it bottomed out. In the bed, Drew and Caleb weren't ready. The impact threw them backward just as the pallets shifted. The next bounce sent the whole load sliding, pinning their feet and lower legs in place and forcing them to hang upside down off the tailgate like a monkey bar. "Help!" Drew and Caleb's voices gurgled as another wave of silty water crashed over them. The truck's momentum carried them through, but Logan was driving blind, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the wall of water. The Ranger slewed sideways, back tires spinning as they hit the steeper far bank. For a heart-stopping moment they hung there. Then the mud all-terrains found grip, and they clawed their way up. "Stop! Stop!" Caleb's muffled voice barely carried over the engine noise. "We're drowning!" Logan slammed the brakes. In the rearview mirror, all he could see were knees kicking in the air, the rest of Drew and Caleb hidden behind the truck. "Oh, shit!" Kyle was already out the door, with Kenny right behind him. The two of them scrambled around the truck, fighting to push back the waterlogged pallets while Drew and Caleb thrashed upside down. "Get us up!" Drew's panic was real, his voice raw with fear and silty water. When they finally hauled their friends upright, both were drenched and gasping, faces red from being inverted. Caleb immediately leaned over the side and vomited up what seemed like half the basin. "What the fuck, Logan?" Drew wheezed between coughs. "You nearly drowned us." "I'm sorry," Logan called back, the adrenaline draining from his system as he realized how badly that could have ended. "You guys okay?" Drew and Caleb climbed shakily out of the bed, water pouring off their clothes. Emily handed them some towels from her backpack while Logan and Kyle started resecuring the pallets. "Look at this," Caleb said, pulling up his pant legs to show a deep purple bruise already forming on his calves. "Pinned us good." "At least the camping gear didn't go over," Kyle grunted, yanking a tie-down strap tight. "Most of it's still dry." Logan was checking his KC lights, making sure none had cracked during the impact. The beam cut through the darkness ahead, illuminating the trail as it wound deeper into the valley. Something about the way the light played off the trees made the shadows seem deeper than they should be. "We could turn back," Kenny offered. Nobody answered him. Drew stripped off his soaked hoodie and pulled on a dry mechanic shirt from his bag. "If we're gonna keep going, let's do it. I don't want to be standing around in wet clothes all night." They were just climbing back into their spots when Drew's voice cut through the quiet. "Moose!" Drew's shout from the truck bed had them all freezing in place. "Big bull, right at the edge of the lights." Logan cut the engine, but left the headlights blazing. The massive silhouette stood just inside the tree line, maybe 30 yards out. In the spill of the KC lights, they could make out the spread of a huge rack. "Holy cow," Kyle breathed. "That's gotta be a 60-incher? The bull didn't move, didn't even seem to blink. Just stood there, watching them with an intensity that made Logan's neck hair stand up. "Something's not right," Emily whispered. "Shouldn't it have bolted when we drove up?" "Maybe it's injured," Kenny suggested from the back seat. "Or sick." Kyle was already walking towards it. "Only one way to find out." "Are you insane?" Kenny hissed. "Dude, if it's hurt or trapped, we should see if we can help it. Besides, when are we going to get this close to a bull this big?" Kyle said, looking back. Drew sighed and grabbed his mag light. "Hold up, I'm coming too." He squeezed Emily's hand. "Stay in the truck." "Like hell," she replied, unbuckling her seatbelt. "I'm not sitting here alone." The four of them approached slowly while Kenny and Caleb watched from the truck, both too paranoid to join. Logan kept his light aimed at the ground. No sense in spooking the bull if it was injured. At 20 yards, Kyle stopped suddenly. "Wait, what the hell?" Logan raised his beam. The rack was massive all right, but something was wrong. Mounted on a crude wooden spear, a freshly severed moose head stared back at them with clouded eyes. Dark fluid still dripped from its neck. "What the fuck?" Kyle choked out, circling the totem, his face hardening. "You know what? Screw this." He planted his feet and grabbed the shaft. "I'm not letting some psycho cultists ruin our weekend." "Kyle, don't," Logan started, but his friend was already shoving hard against the spear. The totem didn't budge. Kyle growled and pushed harder, his boots sliding in the dirt. "Little help here?" "Dude, just leave it," Logan said, but Kyle wasn't listening. He wrapped both hands around the shaft and threw his whole body into it. The wood was slick with blood and whatever else had been used in the ritual. Kyle's hands slipped, and he stumbled forward just as the totem finally gave way. The massive rack caught him across the forearm as he fell. Kyle yelped, more in surprise than pain at first. Then the blood started. "Shit," Logan breathed, catching Kyle's arm in the maglite beam. The cut ran a good 6 inches along his forearm, deep enough to need immediate attention. "Get him back to the truck," Kenny said, already shifting into EMT mode. "I've got my first aid kit in my backpack." They helped Kyle back across the uneven ground, his arm held up to slow the bleeding. Caleb popped the tailgate down so Kyle could have a place to sit. Kenny's hands were steady as he pulled on latex gloves and opened his medkit. "This is gonna sting," he warned, cleaning the wound with antiseptic wipes. Kyle hissed, but didn't pull away. "How bad?" Emily asked, holding Logan's flashlight so Kenny could work. "Not as bad as it looks," Kenny replied, examining the cut carefully. "But it's deep enough to need a proper cleaning and some steri strips." He glanced up at Kyle. "You're gonna want to get actual stitches when we get back, but this'll hold you until then." Kyle nodded, his face pale in the harsh light. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by the sharp sting of antiseptic and the throbbing pain of the cut. "Good thing you were a Boy Scout," Logan said, watching Kenny work with quick, efficient movements. "Yeah," Kyle managed a weak laugh. "Maybe we should head back," Kenny said, packing up his first aid kit. "That cut's gonna need real stitches, and Drew and Caleb are soaked." Kyle hopped off the tailgate, flexing his bandaged arm. "No way. We didn't drag all this crap out here just to turn around because of a scratch." "A scratch?" Kenny's eyebrows shot up. "Dude, I can see muscle tissue." "Then you can see it's fine." Kyle was already climbing back into the passenger seat. "Come on. The spot's only like 10 minutes away, right, Logan?" Logan shared a look with Drew, who just shrugged and started climbing back into the truck bed with Caleb. "Yeah, just around that bend up there. But Kenny's not wrong." "What? You gonna let a little water and some hillbilly art project ruin the weekend?" Kyle grinned, but there was something off about it. Too wide, too many teeth. "Hell, this is already the most exciting camping trip we've had." The rumble of engines cut through the night before Logan could respond. Headlights appeared behind them, and the whine of turbo engines grew louder. "Side by sides," Logan muttered, pulling the Ranger closer to the trail's edge. 3 modified Can-Am X3s roared past, their long travel suspension eating up the terrain Logan had crawled through. The lead machine slowed as it passed the Moosehead Totem, now lying on its side. The driver, face hidden behind a helmet's mirrored visor, stared at their group for a long moment before gunning it to catch up with his buddies. "Well, that's not creepy at all," Emily said, watching the riders disappear around the bend ahead. "Probably the artists themselves," Kyle laughed. He pulled out a small baggie from his pocket. "Good thing I brought something to take the edge off." "Are you serious?" Logan stared at his friend. "You brought that out here?" "Why not?" "Not like there's any cops patrolling Jim Creek on a Friday night." Kyle's laugh had a manic edge to it. "Besides, might help with the pain." Kenny shook his head. "You shouldn't mix that with blood loss." "You shouldn't mix that with being a buzzkill," Kyle shot back, tucking the baggie away. "Now are we camping or what? Those side-by-side guys are probably heading to all the good spots." The others exchanged worried looks. Kyle had always been the wild one of the group, but this felt different, like he was playing chicken with something they couldn't see. From the truck bed, Drew's voice carried through the back window. "Let's just get to the spot before it's completely dark. We can figure out the rest there." Logan nodded and started the engine. As they pulled away, the KC light swept across the trees where the moose head had been. In the fraction of a second before the beams moved on, none of them noticed what the light revealed. A line of similar totems stretching back into the woods, each one faced inward toward the trail, like they were keeping something in, or keeping something out. Chapter 2. The ranger crawled out of the dunes onto the wide expanse of gray silt that marked the edge of the Knik River. Logan kept the truck well away from the tree line, running parallel to the dark wall of spruce and birch. The KC lights caught strange shadows among those trees, but out here on the riverbank, things felt more normal. Almost. "Hey," Kyle said suddenly, sitting up straighter. "Isn't that the same avalanche we saw on the highway? The one with the monster energy drink wrap?" Logan squinted through the windshield. About 50 yards ahead, where a rain-swollen tributary cut across their path, something large and dark sat in the water. As they got closer, the KC lights revealed a lifted Chevy Avalanche, water lapping at its roof rack. "No way!" Drew called from the truck bed, banging on the rear window. Stop! I gotta see this." Logan pulled up alongside the flooded creek. The Avalanche sat about 30 yards out, caught in what must have been a deep section of the crossing. Its massive 40-inch tires were completely submerged. "These guys passed us on the Glen," Emily said. "They were doing at least 90. "Guess speed doesn't help much with water crossings," Kenny muttered. Kyle was already out of the truck, favoring his bandaged arm as he walked toward the creek's edge. "Hello," he shouted across the water. "Anybody still in there?" The Avalanche sat silent, water rushing around it. Its custom wrap reflected their lights in a chaos of neon green and black. "They probably hitched back to the highway," Logan said, but he hesitated leaving it. Drew and Caleb climbed down from the bed, still damp from their own dunking. "That water's moving fast," Caleb observed, watching debris race past in the beam of Logan's light. "No way we're crossing here," Kenny said. "Look how deep it got that truck, and they're lifted higher than us." Kyle picked up a rock and hurled it at the Avalanche. It pinged off the hood with a hollow sound. "Nobody home." "Would you stop?" Emily hissed. "What if they're actually in there?" "They're not," Kyle grinned. "But their truck is. Bet they left some good stuff behind." Logan grabbed Kyle's shoulder. "Dude, what's wrong with you? We're not looting some stuck truck." "Why not? They were driving like assholes anyway. Karma's a—" "Shut up," Drew cut him off. "Listen." They all fell silent. Over the rush of the water, they could hear something else. Music, faint but getting louder. The whine of turbo engines followed. "It's those side-by-sides," Logan said. "Coming back this way." The lights appeared through the trees on the other side of the creek, 3 sets weaving between the trunks. The machines burst out onto the silt, their long travel suspensions absorbing the transition like it was nothing. The lead rider killed his engine, letting the machine coast to a stop at the creek's edge. He pulled off his helmet, revealing a face Logan recognized from around town. Palmer, local, worked at that Fish Creek off-road shop off the Palmer-Wasilla Highway. "We checked a couple miles downstream," the rider called across the water. "Currents ripping through there too, deeper than it looks." He gestured at the Avalanche. "Found that out the hard way." From the back of the group, another rider chimed in. "There's spots that look shallow, but the rain's got everything churned up. Can't tell where the deep channels are." They backtracked through the valley, the Ranger's headlights catching glimpses of other vehicles tucked into various clearings. The normal Friday night Jim Creek crowd was out in force. Lifted trucks circled around bonfires, side-by-sides lined up like alien insects in the darkness, their light bars painting the trees in harsh LED daylight. "There's another spot up ahead," Drew called through the back window. "Used to come out here fishing with my old man. Kind of a pain to get to, but—" "Already taken," Logan muttered as they rounded the bend. A group of jeeps had claimed the clearing, music thumping from somewhere in their camp. Kyle drummed his fingers on the dash, seemingly unbothered by his injured arm. "Since when did this place get so popular?" "Since MySpace," Emily said. "Everyone wants their picture with the glacier now." They pressed on, passing more camps. A group of rock crawlers were attempting some sketchy night wheeling, their spotlights cutting through the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, someone was emptying a mag from what sounded like an AR-15. "Real bunch of scholars out tonight," Kenny commented as they passed a burnt-out shell of what might have once been a GMC Jimmy. "Wait," Drew said suddenly. "Hang a right here, between those 2 big birch trees." Logan turned onto what barely qualified as a trail, the Rangers' suspension creaking as they picked their way through the undergrowth. The path was rough, but showed signs of recent use, broken branches, fresh tire tracks in the mud. "You sure about this?" Logan asked, wincing as a branch scraped along his custom paint. "Trust me," Drew replied. "Nobody comes back here anymore. Too tight for the big rigs, too rough for the side-by-sides." The trail twisted through a dense stand of trees before opening onto a small clearing next to the river. It was higher than the main beach, offering a view across the silty water toward the looming mass of the Knik Glacier. More importantly, it was empty. "Not bad," Logan said, backing the ranger up against the tree line. From here, they could see the occasional flash of light from other camps through the trees, hear the distant thrum of bass and engines, but it felt separate, private. Kyle was already climbing out, reaching for the camping gear with his good arm. Finally, anyone else notice it's getting colder? He was right. The temperature had dropped noticeably since sunset, their breath now visible in the KC lights. Somewhere in the darkness, wood cracked. Maybe a tree settling, maybe something else. But nobody wanted to think too hard about that right now. "Let's get camp set up," Logan said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Drew, you and Caleb still got those wet clothes on?" But Drew was staring at something just beyond the light's reach, where the trees pressed close to their little sanctuary. "Hey, are those marks on the trees, like the ones we saw back there?" The pallets made decent firewood once they got them broken down. Logan and Drew worked methodically, Drew showing his younger brother the right way to use the back of the axe to snap the boards apart, while Caleb and Kenny set up the tents. Emily arranged camp chairs around the growing pile of wood. Chapter 3. "Moment of truth," Kyle announced, pulling a handle-sized bottle of Jack Daniels from his backpack. His bandaged arm didn't seem to bother him as he twisted off the cap and took a long pull. He coughed, trying to hide it with a laugh. "Who's first?" Drew met Logan's eyes. Logan concentrated very hard on positioning another piece of pallet wood. None of them had much experience with drinking. Maybe a stolen beer at a cousin's wedding or a sip of champagne on New Year's, but Kyle had that glint in his eye, the one that meant he wasn't planning on stopping anytime soon. "I'll try some," Kenny said finally, more to break the tension than anything else. Kyle handed him the bottle with a grin that was just a little too wide. Kenny took the smallest sip possible, failed to suppress a grimace, and quickly passed it to Drew. The fire caught properly, sending shadows dancing across their faces. Around them, the sounds of other camps filtered through the trees, distant music, occasional shouts and laughter, the rhythmic thump of someone's subwoofer. "Should we maybe eat something first?" Emily suggested, watching Kyle take another long drink. "Already ahead of you." Kyle pulled out his baggie again. "Got some appetite enhancers right here." "Put that away," Drew snapped, the authority of an older brother creeping into his voice. "You're already mixing booze with blood loss." "Yes, Dad." Kyle rolled his eyes but tucked the baggie back into his pocket. He settled into a camp chair, bottle propped between his legs. "Anyone got any good ghost stories?" "Think we've had enough real scares for one night," Caleb said, still shivering occasionally in his damp clothes despite the fire's warmth. The bottle made another round. Emily pretended to drink and passed it on. Drew managed a real sip this time, while Logan begged off, citing driver responsibility. But Kyle kept pace with the bottle's declining level, his words starting to slur slightly. "You guys are being such babies," he said after another pull. "It's just a camping trip. So what if there's some weird stuff in the woods? So what if—" He trailed off, staring into the darkness beyond their firelight. "If what?" Kenny asked. Kyle blinked, then grinned. "If some of us got a little wet? If some of us got a little cut?" He gestured with his injured arm, the bandage now spotted with dark stains. "It's all part of the adventure, right?" "Maybe slow down a bit," Drew suggested, not liking the way Kyle's eyes seemed to reflect the firelight. "Maybe speed up a bit," Kyle shot back. He stood suddenly, swaying slightly. In fact, he turned toward the trees, raising the bottle. "Here's to whatever's out there. Want some? Come and get it!" "Kyle!" Emily grabbed Drew's arm. "Make him sit down!" But Kyle was already walking toward the edge of their camp, bottle held high like some demented torch. "Come on! I know you're watching! I can feel you watching!" Drew started to rise, but Logan put a hand on his brother's shoulder. "Let him tire himself out," he said quietly. "He's just drunk." Kyle's voice carried back through the darkness. "What's the matter? Don't like Jack Daniels? Maybe you prefer something darker." The fire popped loudly, sending up a shower of sparks. Everyone jumped except Kyle, who just laughed, a sound that wasn't quite right, that went on a few seconds too long. It was going to be a long night. Drew waited until Kyle stumbled back toward the fire, the bottle of Jack now more than half empty. While everyone was watching Kyle's drunken monologue about his battle wound, Drew casually reached into his pack and palmed the can of Campbell's tomato soup he'd been saving for this moment. 20 years of being the older brother had taught him timing was everything. "Hey, Kyle," Drew called out. "Toss another piece of pallet on the fire, would you?" Kyle lurched forward, swaying slightly as he grabbed a board. As he leaned over to feed it into the flames, Drew quietly rolled the can into the base of the fire, nudging it between two burning pallets. Kyle didn't notice, too busy poking at the flames with a stick and continuing his slurred story about the moose head. The group sat around the fire, passing the time. Emily was trying to convince Logan to play his guitar. Kenny was carefully feeding more wood into the flames, building it higher. None of them noticed the innocent-looking can nestled in the coals, slowly heating up. "You guys ever wonder," Kyle was saying, gesturing with his bottle, "if maybe those symbols meant something? Like maybe they were trying to—" The can exploded with a tremendous bang that echoed across the river. Kyle went down hard, sprawling backward with his arms spread wide as dark red liquid sprayed in every direction. "Oh, God!" Logan screamed, seeing his best friend covered in what looked like blood. "Kyle!" Emily shrieked, scrambling backward. Kenny froze, his EMT training warring with pure shock. Caleb just stared, his face pale beneath the red spatters. Kyle didn't move. "No, no, no!" Logan rushed toward his friend, then stopped short. There was so much red, too much, covering everything around the fire. The metallic smell hit their noses, but something wasn't quite right about it. "Kyle?" Logan's voice shook. "Kyle, you okay?" For 3 horrible seconds, nobody breathed. Then Kyle sat up slowly, his face and chest covered in red, looking like something out of a horror movie. His eyes were wide, unfocused. "What the hell? There's so much blood!" Kenny started. "It's soup!" Drew blurted out, realizing how terribly wrong his prank had gone. "It's just Campbell's tomato soup. I put a can in the fire. I thought it would be funny. I didn't think—" "Soup?" Emily whirled on him, trembling with relief and rage. "We thought he was dead. What's wrong with you?" "I'm okay," Kyle said quietly, still staring at his hands as they dripped red. "I'm okay. I'm—" Then he started laughing. Not his normal laugh, but something high and broken that made everyone take a step back. "Kyle!" Logan moved toward his friend, his own hands shaking as the adrenaline started to wear off. "That was awesome!" Kyle suddenly shouted, jumping to his feet. "Let's do it again! Got any more cans, Drew? Cream of mushroom this time?" "No more cans," Drew said firmly, but the damage was done. The already weird night had just gotten weirder. "What the actual hell, Drew?" Logan turned on his brother. "You could have seriously hurt someone. Those chunks of metal." "I wasn't thinking, okay?" Drew ran his hands through his soup-splattered hair. "It was just supposed to pop, not that—" Emily started wiping at her face with a towel, her hands still trembling. "We need to clean this up. All of it. Right now." But Kyle was already back at the fire, poking at the twisted remains of the can with a stick, that strange laugh bubbling up again. "Look at it. All melted and sharp, like teeth. Metal teeth." Kenny grabbed the Jack Daniels bottle before Kyle could reach for it. "I think we've had enough excitement for one night." The fire crackled, casting strange shadows through the soup mist that hung in the air. In the distance, a car alarm started wailing. Other campers wouldn't be coming to investigate anytime soon. You minded your own business at Jim Creek. I really am sorry, Drew said softly. Nobody answered him. They all jumped as another explosion rang out, but this one was just someone at a distant camp firing off another magazine into the night. Kyle's head snapped toward the sound, his soup-covered face splitting into that too-wide grin again. Music, he whispered. Can you hear it? The metal's singing. The soup had mostly dried on their clothes, leaving crusty red stains that looked worse in the firelight. Logan pulled his guitar from its case, his fingers finding an old Metallica riff automatically. He and Kyle had spent countless hours teaching themselves to play, trading the guitar back and forth in Logan's garage until their fingers bled. Pass it here, Kyle said, his voice oddly soft. I've got something in my head. Logan handed over the guitar. Kyle had always been the more experimental one, coming up with original riffs, while Logan preferred learning the classics. Kyle settled cross-legged by the fire, the dried soup making his face look like war paint in the flickering light. His bandaged arm didn't slow him down as his fingers found the strings. He started with something familiar, the intro to Nothing Else Matters. But then it changed, warped. The notes began to twist into something else, something that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. The melody became darker, more primitive, like metal grinding against metal but musical. Then Kyle began to sing, his voice barely above a whisper. Deep in the dunes where the river runs black, where ancient ice watches and never looks back, there's symbols in trees and heads on the spears. Been waiting so long, now the moment is near. Emily grabbed Drew's arm. The fire popped, sending sparks into the night sky. Time is a circle that's drawn in the mud. The price that we pay is measured in blood. The shadows grow teeth in the Jim Creek night, and all of your markers won't put it right. Logan recognized Kyle's finger-picking style, but something was different. The speed, the intensity. It was like his friend was possessed by the music itself. The glacier is watching with eyes made of stone. The water remembers what time has unknown. They marked all the boundaries, drew all the lines, but nothing can hold what's already mine. The last chord hung in the air like smoke. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Somewhere in the darkness, a branch cracked. Holy shit, Logan whispered finally. Where did that come from? Kyle looked up, seeming surprised to find them all staring at him. What? That song, Logan said carefully. Never heard you play anything like that before. Me neither. Kyle grinned, but his eyes were strange, reflecting the firelight like an animal's. Just came to me, like it was already there, waiting to come out. Drew leaned forward. What did you mean about markers, about boundaries? Don't know. Kyle shrugged, but his fingers kept moving on the fretboard, transforming a familiar Pearl Jam riff into something ancient and wrong. Ask the moose. Ask the trees. Ask whatever's out there watching us right now. Okay, that's enough, Emily said, her voice shaky. Maybe we should all get some sleep. But Kyle wasn't listening. He'd started playing something new, something that made the fire dance strangely and set their teeth on edge. The melody was technically perfect. Kyle hadn't missed a note all night despite the whiskey and his injury. But there was something about it that made Logan's skin crawl. Let me show you the bridge I worked out, Kyle said, his grin growing wider. His fingers flew across the fretboard, building a progression that seemed to draw shadows closer to their fire. Logan had jammed with Kyle hundreds of times, but he'd never heard anything like this, and he never wanted to hear it again. The night grew colder. Emily whispered something in Drew's ear, and they quietly slipped away to their tent, the zipper seeming unusually loud in the darkness. Kenny had already passed out in the other tent, his EMT training catching up with him after the long day. Got a bar, Caleb announced suddenly, holding his razor up like a trophy. He wandered to the edge of camp, trying to maintain the precious signal. Hey, babe. Yeah, we made it. No, reception's terrible. Kyle took another pull from the bottle, then passed it to Logan. They sat in camp chairs close to the fire, which had burned down to glowing coals. The guitar lay silent between them. You ever wonder, Kyle said suddenly, his voice different than before. Why they call it spirits. Logan looked at his friend. Kyle was staring into the coals, the red light making his face look hollow. The soup stains had dried black in the darkness. Like alcohol? Logan asked. Mm-hmm. Kyle leaned forward. And why getting drunk is getting possessed? Why bars have happy hour like it's some kind of ritual time? Why they call it taking a shot? Caleb finished his call and headed for the tent. Night, guys. Don't stay up too late being weird. Kyle didn't seem to notice him leave. The oldest alcohol in the world was made for religious ceremonies. Did you know that? For talking to things on the other side? That's just... Logan started to say coincidence, but Kyle cut him off. There's no such thing as coincidence. Not really. It's all connected. The drinking, the offerings, the blood. He looked at his bandaged arm. Sometimes I think we're all just part of some big ritual. We just forgot what it's for. Logan took another drink, trying to ignore the way the shadows seemed to move at the edge of the firelight. You're drunk, man. Am I? Kyle's grin was too wide again. Or am I finally seeing clearly? Maybe this is what alcohol really does. Thins the walls between worlds. That's why they call them spirits, Logan. Because they let the spirits in. A log shifted in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. Kyle tracked them with his eyes as they rose into the darkness. Look at them, he whispered. Like little stars falling up. Or maybe they're rising. Hard to tell which way is up anymore, isn't it? I think we should get some sleep, Logan said carefully. Sleep. Kyle rolled the word around in his mouth like he was tasting it. You know what else thins the walls between worlds? Dreams. That space between sleeping and waking, where anything can slip through. He turned to Logan, and for a moment his eyes seemed completely black in the firelight. Want to see what's been trying to slip through? A branch snapped in the darkness beyond their camp. Logan jumped, but Kyle just smiled. They're getting closer, he said softly. Can you feel it? Kyle drained the last of the jack, tipping the bottle vertical until the final drop hit his tongue. His movements were mechanical now, too precise for someone who'd drunk that much. He pulled the baggie of marijuana from his pocket, his fingers working the rolling paper with unnatural dexterity. Maybe you should slow down, Logan said, watching his friend light the joint. Kyle took a long drag, holding it in. When he exhaled, the smoke seemed to hang in the air too long, swirling in patterns that didn't match the wind. His body went rigid. Kyle? Logan sat forward in his chair. You okay? Kyle's head snapped back, his spine arching. His arms began to shake, fingers splayed wide, but he kept the joint steady between his lips. The seizure lasted only seconds, but when Kyle's head slowly turned toward Logan, that same wide grin was plastered across his face, completely at odds with his flat, curious tone. Why does Logan care so much about Kyle? He asked, taking another drag. His grin stretched wider. Logan and Kyle grew up together, but why? What makes Kyle so special to Logan? What are you talking about? Logan's mouth had gone dry. Kyle wonders, he continued, that impossible grin never wavering. Why Logan followed Kyle into the woods tonight? Kyle isn't Logan's responsibility. Kyle isn't Logan's brother. His head tilted slightly. Kyle isn't even Logan's friend, not really. Kyle is just there. Always there. You're starting to freak me out, man. Kyle's grin widened even further as he took another hit. Logan keeps saying that. Logan keeps watching Kyle with those worried eyes. But Kyle thinks Logan should worry about Logan instead. He leaned forward, smoke curling from his mouth. Kyle sees things clearly now. Kyle understands what's out there in the dark. Does Logan want Kyle to show him? Logan's heart was hammering in his chest. This had to be the drugs. Had to be Kyle having a bad reaction. But there was something about that unchanging grin, about the way his eyes seemed to look through Logan rather than at him. Kyle thinks Logan should run, he said softly, still grinning. Kyle thinks Logan should leave Kyle here. But Logan won't, will he? Logan never leaves Kyle behind. He laughed, a sound like ice cracking. That's going to be a problem. Kyle stood suddenly, that unnatural grin still fixed on his face. He began to move around the fire, not quite dancing, but not quite walking either. His movements were jerky, mechanical, like someone trying to remember how their limbs worked. Kyle thinks the fire is speaking, he said, weaving between the flames and the darkness. Kyle can hear it whispering secrets. His feet kicked up ash as he moved, sending sparks swirling into the night. The joint dangled from his lips, forgotten, but still burning. "Come on, man," Logan said, standing up. "Let's get some sleep. You're not thinking straight." Kyle's movements became faster, more frenzied. His feet stamped patterns in the dirt around the fire, leaving strange marks that didn't look quite like footprints. "Kyle is thinking clearer than ever," he said, his voice eerily calm despite his wild movements. "Kyle sees everything now. Kyle understands what needs to happen." "What are you talking about?" Logan moved to grab his friend's arm, but Kyle spun away, still grinning that terrible grin. "Kyle has served his purpose," he said, taking one final drag from the joint before flicking it into the fire. Kyle opened the door. Kyle spilled the blood. Kyle read the symbols. He stopped moving suddenly, standing perfectly still at the edge of the firelight. And now? "Now what?" Logan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Kyle's grin stretched impossibly wide. It's time for Kyle to die now. Chapter 4. Before Logan could react, Kyle turned and sprinted into the darkness. His laughter echoed through the trees as he disappeared into the woods, heading deeper into the valley. "Kyle!" Logan shouted, starting after him. But the darkness between the trees seemed to swallow his friend whole, leaving nothing but that echoing laugh and the sound of breaking branches growing fainter by the second. Logan crashed through the underbrush, following the sound of Kyle's laughter. His flashlight beam bounced wildly between the trees, catching glimpses of movement that always seemed just out of reach. "Why does Logan chase Kyle?" The voice floated back through the darkness. "Why does Logan care so much?" "Kyle, stop." Logan's foot caught a root, nearly sending him sprawling. The fresh scratches on his face from whipping branches stung in the cold night air. More laughter, higher pitched now, coming from somewhere to his left. Logan pivoted, beam cutting through low-hanging branches. Nothing. "Maybe Kyle will find a bear," the voice called out, closer this time. "That would be fitting, wouldn't it?" Kyle always wanted to see one up close. Logan's chest burned as he ran. The forest floor was treacherous in the dark, covered in half-hidden roots and fallen branches, but he couldn't stop, couldn't let Kyle get too far ahead. "Perhaps the bear will do the job right," Kyle's voice echoed from a new direction. Kyle hopes Logan stays to watch. Kyle wants Logan to see what happens next. The trees began to thin. Logan could hear water ahead. They were heading back toward the river. His light caught something moving through the last stand of birch trees, and then suddenly he was out on the beach. The silty expanse stretched away into darkness, the massive face of the Knik Glacier a pale smudge in the distance. Kyle stood at the water's edge, that same terrible grin visible even at this distance. His feet were bare now, leaving strange tracks in the gray silt. He turned to face Logan, spreading his arms wide. "Kyle made it to the beach," he announced cheerfully, as if they'd just been out for a casual stroll. "Logan made it too. How wonderful." "Kyle's going for a swim," Kyle announced, taking a step toward the dark water. "Like hell you are," Logan growled, rushing forward. He managed to grab Kyle's shirt, yanking him back from the river's edge. Kyle spun, still grinning, and started back toward the trail. Logan stayed on him, herding him away from the water, back toward where he could see their campfire glowing through the trees. "Drew!" he shouted. "Kenny! Get up!" "Kyle thinks Logan is being very pushy," Kyle said, ducking under a branch. "Kyle doesn't like being pushed." They burst into camp, Logan still gripping Kyle's shirt. Kyle twisted suddenly, violently, and there was a loud ripping sound. The Abercrombie and Fitch shirt tore away, leaving Kyle bare-chested in the firelight, still wearing that impossible grin. Logan dove for the nearest tent, unzipping it frantically. "Kenny, Get up! We need help! Kenny bolted upright in his sleeping bag, instantly alert from the urgency. What's wrong? Something's wrong with Kyle, Logan panted. He's not himself. We need to get him in the tent before he hurts himself. Drew emerged from the other tent, Emily peeking out behind him. What the hell's going on? Kyle is going on, Kyle announced cheerfully from the edge of camp. Kyle is finally happening. Ah, heck, Kenny breathed, taking in Kyle's shirtless, wild-eyed appearance. What did he take? Grab him, Logan shouted as Kyle darted between the trees. Drew and Kenny moved to cut him off, but Kyle was unnaturally quick. He slipped between them, laughing that high, wrong laugh. Kyle thinks everyone should come to the beach, he called over his shoulder. Kyle has something to show you all. No, Logan muttered, already running after him. He could hear Drew and Kenny following, their boots pounding on the trail. Kyle's pale skin seemed to glow in the moonlight as he led them back toward the river, his laughter echoing off the trees. The glacier loomed ahead, a massive white wall watching their desperate chase with ancient indifference. Headlights swept across the beach as a rusted-out Ford F-250 rumbled toward them, its bed packed with shadowy figures. Kyle immediately changed direction, sprinting straight for the truck. Kyle wants to make new friends, he shouted, throwing himself into the headlights' glare. The truck skidded to a stop in the silt, music thumping from blown speakers. The people in the bed, Logan counted at least 6, were all wearing dark hoodies despite the cold. Something about their stillness set his teeth on edge. Well, what do we have here? The driver leaned out his window, revealing a gaunt face covered in stick-and-poke tattoos. He looked Kyle up and down, taking in his shirtless, wild-eyed state. You looking to party, friend? Kyle loves to party, Kyle said, still grinning. Kyle wants to see the glacier. A girl in the truck bed held up a cut-off plastic jug filled with something that glowed faintly purple in the headlights from a large orange water cooler. Got some jungle juice right here, baby. Hop in. We're headed that way. He's not going anywhere, Drew said, stepping forward. At 6'2", he cut an imposing figure, but the people in the truck just smiled, thin, hungry smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Think that's his choice, big man, the driver said. Ain't it, Kyle? Kyle chooses chaos, Kyle announced, reaching for the truck bed. Drew moved fast, grabbing Kyle around the waist and yanking him back. One of the hooded figures made a grab for Kyle's arm, but Drew shoved them hard, sending them stumbling back into the bed. Back off, Drew growled, positioning himself between Kyle and the truck. The driver's smile vanished. Maybe we got a problem here. No problem, Kenny said quickly, he and Logan taking advantage of the distraction to get hold of Kyle's arms. Our friends just had too much to drink. We're taking him home. Kyle doesn't want to go home, Kyle thrashed in their grip. Kyle wants to dance with the shadows. The driver studied them for a long moment, then something seemed to pass between him and the others. A look, a nod, something Logan couldn't quite catch. Their smiles returned, colder than ever. Another time then, the driver said, his eyes locked on Kyle. Glacier ain't going anywhere. The truck roared to life, spewing blue smoke as it pulled away. The people in the bed kept watching until the darkness swallowed them, their faces pale ovals in the moonlight. Kyle made new friends, Kyle said happily as Logan and Kenny dragged him toward camp. Kyle thinks they know the old songs too. Shut up, Drew muttered, following close behind them. He kept looking over his shoulder, watching for headlights. They didn't stop until they reached the tent, struggling to keep Kyle under control the whole way. None of them spoke about the hungry looks in those strangers' eyes or the way they'd seemed to know exactly what they'd found wandering shirtless on the beach. Some questions were better left unasked. Back in the tent, Kyle thrashed like a wild animal. Kenny, easily 240 pounds, had to use his full weight across Kyle's legs while Logan, with his powerlifter's build, tried to pin his friend's shoulders. Kyle needs that juice! Kyle's voice was frantic. Kyle saw what was in it! Kyle needs to drink it! Like hell you do, Logan grunted, struggling to keep Kyle's arms down. The tent fabric strained against their movement, threatening to tear. Kyle thinks Logan should try some too. Kyle's grin was visible even in the dim light filtering through the tent walls. Kyle thinks it would help Logan understand. Kenny shifted his weight, trying to get better leverage. For someone who never worked out, Kyle was showing impossible strength. Sweat beaded on Logan's forehead as he fought to maintain his hold. Kyle knows what they put in it. Kyle's voice rose higher. Kyle knows what makes it glow. Kyle wants to... Kenny placed one large hand on Kyle's forehead, closed his eyes, and began to pray silently. The words weren't audible, but the tent grew suddenly still. Kyle's thrashing ceased. For a moment, the only sound was their heavy breathing. Then Kyle moved. It wasn't a struggle or a fight. One moment Kenny and Logan had him firmly pinned, the next they were airborne. Kyle threw them off like they weighed nothing, sending both bigger men crashing into opposite sides of the tent. The nylon walls barely slowed him as he ripped his way out and disappeared into the night. Kenny and Logan lay there for a moment, stunned. They looked at each other in the torn tent's opening, the same thought clear on both of their faces. What they'd just witnessed wasn't possible. No one could throw off nearly 500 pounds of muscle like it was nothing. No human, anyway. Kenny and Logan burst out of the torn tent, stumbling into the firelight. "Drew! Emily! Caleb!" Logan shouted. "Get up!" Kyle's gone again. Kenny's face was pale in the dying firelight. "Guys, I know this sounds crazy, but I think Kyle's possessed." "OMG," Emily groaned, emerging from her tent. "Are you serious with this right now?" "You didn't feel what we felt," Kenny insisted. "He just threw me and Logan across the tent like we were nothing." Caleb rolled his eyes. "No offense, dude, but maybe ease up on the Sunday school stuff. This isn't youth group." "He's probably just having a bad reaction to the weed or something," Drew said, pulling on his boots. "Between the alcohol and whatever else he took." "I'm homeschooled, not stupid," Kenny snapped. "I know what drugs look like. This is different. Logan, back me up here. You felt it too." Logan opened his mouth, then closed it. How could he explain what he'd just experienced? The impossible strength, the way Kyle's voice had changed, that terrible grin that never wavered. "We can figure out what's wrong with him after we find him," he said finally. "Before those people in the truck do." But he couldn't quite meet Kenny's eyes. Couldn't quite deny what they'd both witnessed in that tent. Something was very wrong with Kyle, and deep down, Logan was starting to fear Kenny might be right. They moved through the woods in a tight cluster, forced together by the single beam of Logan's flashlight. Drew took point while the others followed close behind, stumbling over roots and branches in the darkness. "Kyle wonders if bears like soup." Kyle's voice echoed from somewhere ahead. "Kyle still has some on him. Like marinade." "This way," Drew muttered, leading them toward the sound. The beam of light caught broken branches where Kyle had crashed through. "Kyle thinks maybe he'll climb a tree." The voice came from their left now. "Kyle thinks maybe he'll jump. Kyle wants to see if he can fly." Emily grabbed Drew's arm. "He's going to hurt himself." "Kyle thinks maybe the river is better." The laughter bounced between the trees. "Kyle heard hypothermia is like falling asleep, so peaceful." Kenny's voice was tight. That's not Kyle talking." "Shut up about that," Caleb hissed, but he stayed close to the group, eyes darting into the darkness beyond their light. "Kyle has so many options." The voice was moving again, always just out of reach. "Kyle could find those nice people with the truck. Kyle bets they know lots of fun ways to die." Logan's beam caught a flash of pale skin through the trees. They changed direction, following it, branches whipping at their faces in the darkness. "Kyle thinks Logan should join him." "Kyle thinks everyone should join him. We could all go together." The trees began to thin. They could hear water ahead, the sound of the river growing louder. Kyle's laughter led them on, high and broken, until suddenly they burst out onto the beach. The gray silt stretched away into darkness, the glacier a looming white wall in the distance. Kyle was out there somewhere, but in the open space, his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Kyle found the perfect spot." The words echoed across the water. "Who wants to go first?" "We need to get him out of here," Logan said, pulling his keys from his pocket. "Emily, take these. Get the truck down here. We're going to have to grab him and load him up fast. Emily nodded, catching the keys one-handed. What if he runs? He won't, Drew said grimly. We're not letting him. They watched Emily start back toward the trail to camp. The beam of Logan's flashlight caught her figure growing smaller against the tree line. Something about the quiet felt wrong. Even Kyle had stopped laughing. The sound came first. An engine wound out to full throttle, tires spinning in the silt. Their eyes were still adjusting to the darkness when the lifted Jeep XJ burst out of nowhere, its light bar blazing. Emily had just enough time to turn her head toward the sound. Then she was gone. There was no impact, no scream. One moment Emily was there, the next she was just mist. A red cloud hanging in the Jeep's wake like fog. The Jeep skidded to a stop 30 yards down the beach. For a horrible moment, nobody moved. Then the driver's door cracked open, just enough for them to hear a muffled, "Oh, shit!" The door slammed shut. Tires sprayed silt as the Jeep launched forward, engine screaming as it disappeared into the darkness. Drew's knees hit the ground. The keys Emily had been holding landed in the silt with a soft plink, glinting in Logan's flashlight beam. From somewhere in the darkness, Kyle's laughter began again. Drew was moving before anyone could stop him. He sprinted to where Emily lay crumpled in the silt, dropping to his knees beside her. His hand went to the small of his back, coming up with a .44 revolver his grandpa had given him. "Drew, no!" Logan shouted. The first shot cracked across the beach. The Jeep's rear window exploded in a shower of glass. Drew kept firing, each muzzle flash lighting up the night like lightning. The rounds found metal, punching through the tailgate as the Jeep fishtailed away. Caleb lunged for Drew, his massive frame moving with surprising speed. "Stop! You'll kill them!" Drew spun toward the sound, still firing on autopilot. Grief turned to pure rage. The flash illuminated his face, tears streaming, teeth bared. The impact sound was wet. Caleb's expression went from determination to confusion. All 6 feet 7 inches of him seemed to fold in on itself as he dropped into the silt, landing with a heavy thud that seemed to shake the ground. "No, no, no!" Drew's gun clattered to the beach as he scrambled toward Caleb's fallen form. Kenny was already there, EMT training kicking in. But even in the dim light, they could see it was bad. Really bad. "Kyle thinks everyone's dying tonight." Kyle's voice rang out from the darkness, gleeful and wrong. "Kyle thinks the beach needs more red." Drew fell back, staring at his hands, at what he'd just done, at Emily's body lying broken in the silt, at Caleb's blood soaking into the gray sand. And somewhere out there, Kyle kept laughing. In the distance, the Jeep's engine sputtered and died. The vehicle coasted to a stop, its light bar still blazing across the silt. No one emerged from the driver's side. Drew stared at his hands in the harsh LED glare, Emily's blood and Caleb's mixing on his skin. His shoulders started to shake. "Drew," Logan said quietly, taking a step toward his brother. Just breathe." Drew's hand found the revolver in the silt. He looked at Emily's body, then at Caleb, bleeding out under Kenny's desperate attempts to save him. He slowly and methodically reloaded, pushing fresh shells into the chamber. "I can't," Drew whispered. "I can't fix this." "Drew, don't." "Sorry, bro." Drew's voice cracked as he raised the pistol to his temple. "I'm so sorry." The shot echoed across the beach. Drew crumpled next to Emily, the pistol falling from his lifeless hand. Somewhere in the darkness, Kyle's laughter took on a new note, something like satisfaction. "Kyle thinks the beach looks better in red." Chapter 5. Initializing. Welcome, Commander. Situation critical. Casualties, 3. Unit status, critical. Reinforcements lost. Logan's vision blurred, reality fracturing into familiar geometric patterns, just like the commander screen on Command and Conquer. The beach transformed into a tactical map, wireframe graphics overlaying the horror before him. Kenny's desperate face became a flashing unit icon, his voice distorted like radio chatter. Command Center. Black Beauty, Ranger, idle. Unit, Medic, attempting emergency repairs. Unit, Caleb, critical damage, unit disabled. Enemy unit. Kyle. Possessed. Position unknown. Logan! Kenny's voice came through like a garbled transmission. Logan, I need you to snap out of it. I can't drive manual. Warning. Medic unit lacks vehicle operation protocols. Strategic options limited. Threat level, maximum. Kenny's hands on his shoulders registered as damage indicators flashing red in his peripheral vision. The beach was a battlefield map, marked with resource nodes where his friends' bodies lay. Unit lost, Drew. Unit lost, Emily. Unit damaged, Caleb. Kyle thinks Logan should join the party. The voice echoed across the tactical grid, marking enemy positions with each sound. Enemy transmissions detected. Position triangulation failed. Recommend immediate evacuation. Logan! Kenny's icon flashed urgent red. We're losing him. I need you to drive. Strategic assessment. Calculating survival probability. China has been generous. Error. Player not responding. My feet hurt. System failure imminent. The beach was rendered in perfect wireframe geometry, clean and precise, nothing like the messy reality of blood soaking into silt. Just like the game. Just like those afternoons with Kyle, commanding digital armies where death was just a status effect and you could always hit restart. Warning. Reality protocols failing. System reboot required. Press any key to continue. System malfunction. Critical error. Impact detected. Pain exploded across Logan's face as Kenny's forehead connected with his nose. The wireframe graphics shattered, reality rushing back in like a cold wave. The beach was just a beach again, dark and stained with blood. I'm sorry, Kenny said, already moving to grab Drew's dropped pistol from the silt. But we have to move. Now. Logan touched his nose, his hand coming away wet. The pain helped anchor him to reality. Caleb. Help me get him up. They each grabbed one of Caleb's arms. The big man was unconscious, dead weight as they tried to lift him. Kenny had wadded up his shirt and pressed it against the wound, but blood was still flowing. Kyle thinks everyone's leaving the party early. Kyle's voice echoed from somewhere in the darkness. Shut up! Logan screamed, his voice cracking. Just shut up! Kenny scooped up Logan's keys that Emily had dropped and shoved them into his pocket, keeping the revolver trained toward Kyle's voice as they half-carried, half-dragged Caleb across the beach. The big man's boots left deep furrows in the silt. The truck's just up the trail, Kenny panted. We can do this. We have to do this. Logan's arms burned with the effort. Caleb might have been slim, but 6'7" of unconscious human was still nearly impossible to move. Every step felt like a mile. Behind them, Kyle started humming something that might have been a funeral march. They didn't look back at the bodies they were leaving behind. They couldn't afford to. Not if they wanted to save the one friend they still had a chance of saving. They smelled the smoke before they saw it. Logan's stomach dropped as they rounded the final bend to their campsite. His black beauty was engulfed in flames, the custom paint job bubbling and peeling in the heat. The LED light bar exploded as they watched, sending glass raining down on the hood. No, Logan breathed. No, no, no. Their tents lay shredded, contents scattered across the clearing. Kenny's medical kit had been emptied, supplies ground into the dirt. The remains of their camp's chairs were tossed into the dying campfire. Never leave your campsite unguarded at Jim Creek, Kyle's voice sang out from the darkness. Kyle knows what happens when you leave things unattended out here. Something might happen to them, just like something might happen to your soul. Caleb moaned softly between them, his blood leaving a trail in the dirt. What do we do? Kenny's voice shook as he tried to keep the Glock aimed into the shadows while supporting Caleb. Logan, what do we do? The truck's gas tank ruptured with a whoosh, sending a fresh wave of flames into the night sky. The heat forced them back toward the tree line. Logan could see his phone melting in the passenger seat, their last link to the outside world. Kyle's laughter echoed from multiple directions, like he was everywhere at once. Kyle thinks everyone should stay. Kyle thinks no one should leave. Kyle thinks... A branch snapped behind them. They spun, Kenny nearly dropping Caleb as he tried to aim the pistol. Nothing was there, just shadows and Kyle's endless laughter. "We have to get out of here," Logan said, his voice hoarse from smoke and fear. "We have to find help." "How?" Kenny gestured at their ruined camp with the gun. "We're miles from anywhere." The fire reflected in Logan's eyes as he watched his truck burn. "We walk, or we die here." Somewhere in the darkness, Kyle began to sing. "There!" Kenny pointed with the Glock. "Looks like a bonfire through the trees. Has to be another camp." Logan adjusted his grip on Caleb, who was getting heavier with each step. The big man's breathing had become shallow, his skin cold and clammy despite the night's warmth. That's got to be half a mile," Logan panted. "Can he make it that far?" "He has to." They started toward the distant flames, stumbling through the underbrush. The firelight from their burning camp faded behind them, leaving only Kenny's wavering flashlight beam to guide their way. "Kyle thinks friends should stick together." The voice came from their left. Kenny swung the light toward it, and they both froze. Kyle stood between two trees, but something was wrong with his proportions. His arms hung too low, nearly touching the ground. His legs seemed to bend at odd angles. "Kyle wants to show you something special." He stepped forward, and his shadow didn't match his movement. It stretched and twisted across the ground like something with too many limbs. "Jesus," Kenny whispered. "Tell me you see that too." "Don't look at him," Logan said through gritted teeth. "Just keep moving." They pushed on toward the distant bonfire, but Kyle kept pace with them, weaving between trees with that wrong-jointed walk. Sometimes he seemed to cover impossible distances between blinks, appearing ahead of them when he should have been behind. "Kyle knows a shortcut. Through the trees, through the dark, through the spaces between spaces." "He's blocking our path to the fire," Kenny said quietly. "No," Logan realized. "He's hurting us. Away from the other camp, deeper into the woods." Caleb's head lolled against Logan's shoulder. They were running out of time. "Kyle just wants to play. Kyle just wants everyone to stay. Kyle just wants—" A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness, and Kyle's head snapped around to look, but his body didn't turn with it. Caleb's legs gave out completely, nearly pulling them all down. I can't carry him much further," Logan gasped. Through the trees ahead, another fire flickered to life. Closer than the first one, maybe 100 yards through the woods. The flames had an odd purple tinge to them. "No," Kenny said. "That's the direction it wants us to go. Kyle knows which fire burns brightest." The thing that used to be Kyle called from the shadows, its limbs folding in ways that bones shouldn't allow. "Kyle knows which fire keeps you warmest." Caleb made a wet sound in his throat. His skin had gone gray. "He's not going to make it to the other camp," Logan said quietly. "We don't have a choice." Kenny looked between the two fires, the distant normal one and the closer purple-tinged flames. "This is a mistake." "Kyle thinks friends should follow friends?" The thing danced between the trees, its shadow writhing independently across the ground. "Kyle thinks everyone should come to the special fire." They changed direction, heading toward the purple flames. Each step felt heavier than the last, like they were walking into quicksand, or like something was pulling them forward. "Almost there," the thing sang, its voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Kyle can't wait for everyone to see." The purple fire grew brighter through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, behind them, the other fires went out. They broke through the tree line and stopped dead. The purple flames came from torches arranged in a perfect circle, at least 30 feet across. Symbols had been carved into the ground between them, the same twisted patterns they'd seen on the Moosehead totem. In the center stood a throne that shouldn't exist. Skulls of every size had been fused together into a towering seat. Deer, moose, bear, and things that looked disturbingly human. The purple light caught in empty eye sockets, making them seem to move. Around the circle stood figures in hooded purple robes, at least 20 of them, perfectly still. Their hoods were pulled low, hiding their faces, but their hands were wrong. Too long, too pale, too many joints. Kyle brought friends. The thing that was Kyle emerged from the woods behind them, its proportions now completely inhuman. Kyle brought gifts. The hooded figures turned as one to face them. Under their hoods, something glowed with the same purple light as the torches. "Oh, God," Kenny whispered, the Glock shaking in his hand. "Oh, God. Oh, God." Caleb hung limp between them, blood dripping onto the carved symbols at their feet. The liquid seemed to move on its own, flowing along the patterns like it was being drawn into them. One of the robed figures stepped forward, raising impossibly long arms in welcome. "We've been waiting," it said in a voice like metal grinding on bone. "The circle must be completed." Chapter 6. The thing that was wearing Kyle moved in a blur of impossible angles, landing on the skull throne like a spider. His two long limbs draped over the bones as he settled in, grinning down at them with that never-changing smile. That's when Logan heard it. John Mayer's gravity drifting across the clearing. Through the purple torchlight, he could make out a line of vehicles parked on the far side. Jeeps, trucks, and... was that the rusted F-250 from earlier? "Please," the robed figure gestured with those wrong hands toward a folding table set up near the circle's edge. "You must be exhausted. We have refreshments." Logan blinked. The table was loaded with party snacks, cookies, chips, what looked like a vegetable tray with ranch dip. A cooler sat nearby, beaded with condensation. "Your friend needs medical attention," another cultist said, voice like grinding glass but somehow concerned. "We can help. We are capable of healing his wounds." "Kyle thinks everyone should have a snack," the thing on the throne called down. "Kyle thinks everyone should get comfortable." Kenny's grip tightened on the Glock, but his arm was shaking badly. This can't be." "Please," the first cultist insisted, those long fingers gesturing at the snack table. "The ranch dip is homemade." Caleb moaned softly between them, blood still dripping into the carved symbols. The purple flames seemed to pulse in time with his weakening heartbeat. Everything felt wrong, like a nightmare trying to pretend it was a church social. The John Mayer song ended, and "Your Body is a Wonderland" began playing from the parked cars. "Kyle thinks Logan should try the cookies," the thing on the throne called down. "They're to die for." "Maybe." Kenny lowered the Glock slightly, his eyes growing distant. "Maybe this isn't so bad?" Two robed figures glided forward, taking Caleb from their trembling arms. Kenny barely seemed to notice, transfixed by something only he could see. "Man, this is wild," Kenny breathed, a slow smile spreading across his face. "So many naked women here. It's perfect." Logan felt the tension leaving his shoulders as gravity washed over him. The purple torches weren't so bad, really. Kind of soothing. Like a high-end cocktail bar with some edgy decorating choices. He could almost smell coffee and warm pastries. "This is nice," Logan found himself saying. "The John Mayer was a good touch. Really brings the whole vibe together." Kenny turned to him, swaying slightly to a rhythm Logan couldn't hear. "Who's John Mayer?" "Dude, Lamb of God is absolutely crushing it right now. Look at that mosh pit." They stared at each other for a moment, but the concern that should have been there felt distant, unimportant. "Kyle thinks everyone is starting to understand." Its voice was still wrong, but maybe that was okay too. Maybe everything was okay. The robed figures moved among the symbols, their hoods now seeming to contain only darkness and purple flame. Logan found himself nodding along to the music, wondering if they had any of those little sandwich things you get at coffee shops. Kenny was playing air guitar to his own private metal show. Somewhere in the back of their minds, a small voice was screaming that something was wrong, that they'd lost sight of Caleb, that none of this was real. But the music was so nice, and everyone was so welcoming, and maybe they could just stay a while. Logan sank into a camp chair that hadn't been there a moment before, letting the music wash over him. The clearing had transformed into the coffee shop of his dreams. Exposed brick walls, vintage posters, the smell of fresh espresso. John Mayer himself was on a small stage, playing an intimate acoustic set. Except The brick walls were bleeding, and John Mayer's fingers had too many joints. Kenny stumbled through what he saw as a massive concert venue, complete with laser lights and pyrotechnics. Beautiful women in leather and chains writhed to the music all around him. This was paradise. But their faces weren't quite right. And were those chains moving on their own? Kyle thinks everyone should look closer. The thing on the throne called out, its voice harmonizing perfectly with both versions of music. Kyle thinks the details make it special. Logan reached for what he thought was a cappuccino. The liquid in the cup was purple, moving like it was alive. The barista's smile stretched too wide, revealing row after row of teeth receding into her throat. Kenny's mosh pit had turned violent in ways that defied physics. Limbs bent backward, heads spun complete circles, blood sprayed in geometric patterns that burned themselves into the air. Wait. Logan's voice sounded far away. Something's... The coffee shop's walls were made of writhing bodies now. John Mayer's guitar was screaming in human voices. The robed figures glided between tables that crawled across the floor on legs made of bone. Kenny's concert crowd had merged into a single mass of flesh and metal, still moving to the music but flowing like liquid mercury. The women weren't women anymore. They were something wearing women's shapes like ill-fitting suits. Kyle thinks it's time for the main event. They looked up at the throne. Kyle's body had split open like a flower, something moving inside him that glowed with that terrible purple light. Reality was tearing at the edges, and through the rips, they could see what was really there. Through the haze of his coffee shop hallucination, Logan heard the sharp crack of gunfire. Kenny had raised the Glock, his hands suddenly steady. "I'm saving myself for marriage," Kenny growled, emptying the magazine into the thing on the throne. The bullets tore through Kyle's twisted form, spraying something dark and oily instead of blood. The impact shattered the illusions like glass. The coffee shop vanished. The concert disappeared. Reality snapped back into focus with nauseating clarity. The purple flames, the carved symbols, the robed figures with their impossible limbs. The thing that was Kyle still sat on its throne of skulls, wounded but laughing. Kyle thinks Kenny is no fun at parties. Its voice warped and crackled. Kyle thinks Kenny needs to loosen up. Kenny dropped the empty magazine and slammed a fresh one home with practiced ease. His face was set in grim determination, all traces of the hallucination gone from his eyes. Logan staggered as his mind cleared, grabbing Kenny's shoulder for support. The world spun as his brain tried to reconcile what he'd thought he was seeing with what was actually there. The robed figures had stopped their gliding dance, all their hoods turned toward Kenny and Logan, purple flames flickering where faces should be. Kyle thinks it's rude to refuse hospitality. The thing on the throne's wounds were already closing, the oily substance drawing back into its body. Kyle thinks someone needs to teach Kenny some manners. With the illusion shattered, they saw the clearing for what it really was. An altar of rough stone sat opposite the skull throne, and on it... "Oh, God," Logan choked. Caleb lay stripped to the waist, arranged between Emily and Drew's bodies. Other corpses he didn't recognize were lined up alongside them, all positioned with terrible precision. Symbols had been carved into their bare chests. Outside the circle of purple flames, Logan spotted a pile of personal effects: phones, wallets, clothing, and weapons. A sawed-off Mosin Nagant leaned against a tactical shotgun and what looked like an AR pistol. "Kenny!" Logan pointed. "We go through them, straight to Caleb!" Kenny was already moving, the Glock barking as he advanced. The first robed figure took 2 rounds center mass and fell, its hood falling back to reveal nothing but writhing shadows and purple flame. Logan sprinted for the weapon pile, diving into a roll as something fast and wrong-shaped slashed at him with 2 long claws. He came up with the Mosin, its short barrel making it handle like a big pistol. The action was already worked. The blast took another cultist in the chest, the heavy round throwing it backward into the flames. It caught fire but didn't scream, just kept trying to walk forward as it burned. "Kyle thinks everyone is being very rude," the thing on the throne called out as Kenny dropped 2 more robed figures. Logan worked the Mosin's action and fired again, the brutal recoil numbing his hand. 3 cultists down. 4. Their purple robes billowed empty as they fell. "He's still breathing!" Kenny shouted, reaching Caleb. "Help me get him off this thing!" Logan turned to cover their retreat and found himself staring into the thing that was Kyle's face, now inches from his own. Kyle thinks the party's just getting started. With Kyle's twisted face inches from his own, Logan squeezed the Mosin's trigger. Click. Empty. He dropped it and scrambled for another weapon in the pile, his hand finding Drew's splitting axe. The worn handle felt right, familiar, like all those summer days splitting firewood with his brother, all those hours mowing lawns and working harvests at the catnip farm. The muscle memory was there, built over years of hard work. Now it had a different purpose. Before the thing wearing Kyle's face could react, Logan swung. Years of technique behind the strike, every hour of farm work distilled into pure violence. The blade caught it under the jaw, splitting Kyle's face nearly in half. Black ichor and fragments of teeth sprayed across Logan's chest. "This is for Drew!" The thing's face peeled open like wet paper, that eternal grin finally broken. It tried to speak, but only managed a wet gurgle as Logan brought the axe around again. The blade found its shoulder, biting through meat that moved and writhed like worms beneath the skin. "For Emily." Something inside Kyle's chest cavity was pulsing, trying to pull itself free of the mangled flesh. Logan's neck swing caught it in the sternum, the bones beneath splitting with a sound like breaking branches. Oily blackness gushed from the wound, carrying chunks of tissue that seemed to still be moving. "Kyle. Thinks. Hurts." The voice was barely human now, more animal than speech, bubbling up through the ruined throat. The thing scrambled backward on limbs that kept sprouting new joints, that kept breaking and reforming as it moved. The axe caught it in the ribs, and something inside screamed. Not Kyle's voice, not anything that should exist in this world. For Black Beauty. His truck, his pride, his freedom. Now a burning wreck because of these things. The axe blade flashed in the purple light as Kyle's mangled form retreated up the skull throne, leaving a trail of writhing tissue and black oil that seemed to try crawling back up the bones. "Logan! Stop! Kyle! Stop!" The words came between wet, clicking sounds as the thing's throat tried to rebuild itself. Logan's response was to grab a gas can from the pile of scavenged items. He began dousing the base of the skull throne, the fuel mixing with the oily substance and quivering flesh dripping from Kyle's wounds. "No fire! Kyle! No! Burn!" The thing perched at the top of its throne, pieces of itself still falling away, trying to stay above the spreading gas. But there was nowhere left to retreat. Logan's arms burned with familiar fire, like a long day's work, but compressed into minutes of fury. He'd made his living shaping the land with tools like this. Now he was reshaping reality itself, one plash of gas at a time. Logan reached into his pocket and pulled out the battered Zippo his dad had carried through 3 tours with the Rangers. The worn brass felt heavy in his hand as he flicked it open. "Kyle, no. Please." The ruined thing at the top of the throne tried reforming its face, tried finding that grin again, but there weren't enough pieces left to make it work. "You're not Kyle," Logan said quietly. His thumb struck the flint. The gas caught with a woof. Blue flame raced up the skull throne, igniting the black oil that dripped from the creature's wounds. The fire turned purple as it touched the thing that used to be his friend. Then the screaming started. It wasn't Kyle's voice anymore. It wasn't even trying to be. The sound that came from the burning mass of flesh and bone was like metal tearing, like ice breaking, like something ancient and wrong finally meeting its end. The skull throne became an inferno. Whatever was wearing Kyle's skin thrashed and twisted, its limbs multiplying and burning away as fast as they formed. The purple flames mixed with natural fire, creating patterns in the air that hurt to look at. "Never should have come to Jim Creek." The voice was legion now, 1,000 screams layered into one. "Never should have crossed the line." Logan watched as the thing that killed his brother, his friends, that destroyed his truck and tried to steal his soul, burned away to nothing. The old Zippo was still warm in his hand when the screaming finally stopped. The skull throne collapsed in on itself, leaving nothing but ash and silence. Logan stood transfixed by the burning remnants of the throne, his dad's Zippo still hot in his hand. He didn't hear the soft footsteps in the silt behind him. The last cultist had shed their purple robe, revealing dirty jeans and a grimy tank top beneath. Their face was human, one of the people from the rusted F-250. In their hand, a curved ritual dagger glinted in the dying firelight. They raised the blade, already imagining it sliding between Logan's ribs. The AR pistol barked 3 times from somewhere behind them. The cultist's chest erupted in a spray of red. Real blood this time, human blood. They toppled forward, the dagger falling harmlessly into the silt. Logan spun to find Kenny standing there, the stubby barrel of the AR still smoking. He'd managed to get Caleb to one of the parked vehicles and had come back just in time. "Check your 6, man," Kenny said, lowering the weapon. His voice shook slightly. "That's like the first rule of every action movie ever." Logan looked down at the very human corpse at his feet. No black oil, no writhing flesh. Just another person who'd chosen the wrong side of whatever they'd just been through. "Thanks," Logan managed. His throat felt raw from smoke and screaming. "Caleb, in the back of a Suburban, still breathing, but we need to get him to a hospital, like 10 minutes ago." Logan nodded, taking one last look at the burning throne. "Then let's get the hell out of Jim Creek." Chapter 7. The Suburban's headlights cut through the darkness as Kenny pushed it toward Wasilla. Logan sat in the back with Caleb, keeping pressure on the wound that still bled steadily through the compress. Somewhere past the Glen Highway junction, Caleb's eyes fluttered open. "Did we win?" His voice was weak but clear. "Sort of," Logan said. Then he noticed something strange. The bloody compress Kenny had pressed against the gunshot wound was dry. When Logan lifted it, the wound was closing. They watched in stunned silence as the bullet hole seemed to heal itself, flesh knitting together like time-lapse photography. But the symbol the cultists had carved into his chest remained. The Matsu Regional parking lot was empty when they pulled in. The story came out in pieces to the doctors, the cops. A camping trip gone wrong, someone having a bad reaction to something, gunfire in the dark. The police found Drew and Emily's bodies. Kyle was officially listed as missing. The investigation dragged on for weeks. Bath salts was thrown around a lot in the official reports. People wanted simple answers, and drugs were simpler than the truth. Caleb's wounds healed slowly, normally, until they didn't. 3 months after that night at Jim Creek, he called Kenny over to his place to show him something. The cuts had finally scarred over, but not like regular scars. The symbol was raised and white, like a freezer burn, like the time Caleb had pressed a hammer head to his chest during that 40 below cold snap, when the metal had burned worse than fire. "Remember that?" Caleb asked, touching the mark. "How the hammer left a perfect outline?" Kenny just stared at the symbol, his hand unconsciously moving to the cross he'd started wearing under his shirt. Logan kept the Suburban. Some nights he'd drive it out to the Glen, but never past where Sullivan Road ends. Sometimes, when the winter sun hit it just right, he swore he could still smell wood smoke and something sweeter, like incense. But he never took it back to Jim Creek. Some places you only visit once.
Where the river runs black, where ancient ice watches and never looks back. There's symbols in trees and heads on the spears. Been waiting so long now, the moment is near. Time is a circle that's drawn in the mud. The price that we pay is measured in blood. The shadows grow teeth in the Jim Creek is watching with eyes made of stone. The water remembers what time has unknown. They marked all the boundaries, drew all the lines, but nothing can hold what's already mine.
For the friends who shared those endless Alaskan summer days and the dark winter nights that seemed to stretch forever. Who played soldier with me under the northern lights, who rode mattresses down icy streets, and who gathered around fires, sharing stories while the wind howled around us. And especially for those who remained, who grew alongside me like the hardy spruce trees of our home, roots intertwined beneath the frozen ground. You've proven that true friendship, like the Alaska wilderness, endures through all seasons. Your footprints in the snow may have faded, but the trails we blazed together led me here. To my wife and children, who makes every story worth telling. To Drew, Emily, Logan, Caleb, and Kessler, and my sisters, the original cast of characters who set the stage for everything that followed. Riley and John, and every beautiful disaster who crashed into our lives and decided to stay, you made this adventure better. And to both Asian and Marine Adams, though time and distance have carried us in different directions, you're remembered here. I hope you found what you were looking for. You're all woven into these pages, whether you're meant to be or not. Thank you for listening to this audiobook. I'm Thomas Richter, and it's been an honor to share this story with you. If you're ready for your next mission, we've got a full arsenal of series waiting for you on this platform. Each one is locked and loaded with the kind of stories that keep you pressing forward no matter what. For those who march to the beat of our soundtrack, all of our music is deployed across every major streaming platform: Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, you name it. Just search for Springfield Syndrome or the audiobook title to add it to your playlist. Your support keeps us in the fight, and we'd be grateful if you'd drop us a review wherever you grab this audiobook. Your feedback is our intel. It helps us improve our operations and helps other listeners find their next objective. Stay strong, stay sharp, and remember, the only easy day was yesterday. This is Thomas Richter, signing off.